you for joining us today for Good News on Point. I am Evelyn Davison, and we're happy to have you join us today as we talk about the values that we live by in the great state of Texas. We are broadcasting live from the On Point Broadcasting Center. We're about 4 blocks from the Texas State Capitol. And in the studio with me today is a young man named Jonathan Saenz. And Jonathan is the CEO and director for Texas Values. And the values we'll be talking about today are those values that are so important for living life and loving life. Whether you're in Texas, you're in Louisiana, or you're maybe in Romania or China, because we know we have a worldwide audience. And we thank you for joining us. Jonathan, it's good to have you.
Good to be with you, Evelyn. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's going to be an exciting day. Carol is not with us today, and she said to give you her best regards. So I'm a little bit blessed in that I have you all by myself today. We try to have a little fun here on Point, and we think about how wonderful it is to live in the great state of Texas. Are you a Texan by birth?
I am. I'm actually at least 5th generation Texan.
5th generation.
So my family has deep roots on the Mexican-American side, also on the German side. There's a lot of folks that are, German and different, Czech and all these different things in the Central Texas area. So that's, both sides of my family are well represented in Texas.
Well, how did you get to Austin from Texas? Where did you?
I grew up in the Houston area.
In the Houston area.
Really just, and I look at the work that I do now, and you think about some of the experiences you have as a child, and how they really kind of set you on a path, but all come together sometimes as you become an adult and you start working professionally. And so, grew up in a part of Houston, the Port of Houston, right next to the Port of Houston, the ship channel, which many people may know. I mean, it's one of the most busiest ports in the world.
Yes.
You think about how important the Port of Houston is, as important it is for the state of Texas and the world and our economy. And so I grew up right there, but I also grew up, as I like to say, under the shadow of the San Jacinto Monument.
Oh, I love that place.
Which is just about 5 or 10 minutes from where I grew up. And so, as a young child, we did a lot of things as a family where we went to the historical areas of the state of Texas and the San Jacinto Monument and the Alamo, and I have relatives that worked on the King Ranch when they were young. And so, but it's great to continue to thrive in the state of Texas. But as a young man, I looked at how could I serve as a Christian? How could I serve others? And so had experiences when I was younger of seeing people sometimes not treated fairly, sometimes taken advantage, and sometimes they were Christians. And so I felt like, if I ever had an opportunity professionally to help people out who sometimes did not have someone to look out for them or to speak up for them, that's something that I would like to do. And that really set me on my way at the University of Texas, and then law school at the University of Houston, and then to work professionally on values issues. Came to Austin in 2008, returned to Austin, I guess I should say, having graduated from the University of Texas at Austin and been here before. And so had an opportunity to work here in Austin, close to the Capitol, to interact with elected officials and other policymakers, and be right next to and right in the middle and on the front lines of the values that I think Texans hold dear. And those, in my opinion, are faith, family, and freedom.
Faith, family, and freedom. That's a 3-point outline. I like that. Tell me about your family.
Sure.
You have children?
I do have 3 beautiful children. And I tell you, I love being a father. And so, a great opportunity during the recent legislative session where we did some work with elected officials on the Merry Christmas bill and on protecting the teaching of Christmas in public schools. And so had my children there with me in the Senate gallery when that bill was being passed. And so I just, I enjoy being a family man. And so, it's one of those things where you think about how all these issues fit together to make you who you are, but at the same time, when you have an opportunity to be a model for your children and having an impact not only on their individual lives, but on the lives of other families. And so in many ways, a family is a business model. I mean, it's kind of the smallest or a microcosm of so many other things we do. And so I enjoy all that I do in my responsibilities and my roles there. And so, being here in Austin, we're so close to so many parts of government that we're able to do that. And so the more that I can have my family involved in those things, I cherish that. But I also consider it a blessing to be able to lead with my Christian faith as well.
That's so important, Jonathan, that we are who we are in identity, not just in the way we believe, but the way we live.
Yeah.
If we don't live it, in a family, then children are so misguided when they see false things within a household.
Yeah.
It is critical, and it doesn't matter if your children are 5 or 4 or 10, or if they're back home from college, or they've been to college and now back home, like the governor was, when he got out of the Air Force, had to go back to the paint rock. Mm-hmm. Those are times when family calls you home, and it gives you an opportunity, again, to just be a part of that thing that is so powerful, not only in an individual's life, but in a nation or a state's life. Let's talk about some family issues.
Yep.
We've just gone through a major legislative session that has dealt with some really hard issues this year. But let's start with marriage. What is, if you could identify the wrong interpretation of marriage today, either in Texas or in the nation, what would that be?
Well, I would tell people that there's really no other issue that I feel is important in currently and in the future of society when it except in quite honestly marriage.
Right.
And not only how it's defined, but how it's respected and how it's treated. And there's so many things that go along with that. I mean, I did study sociology as an undergrad student, and we talked about how these family policy issues, marriage, how it's defined, and how it's treated and respected in law has a tremendous impact on our society. And marriage is one of the greatest wealth builders. We know that it has an impact on how long people live. We know that the place that it has in our economy is tremendous. It has such a great positive impact on our economy. And so when you see that the definition of marriage is under attack, you know that it's going to have an impact in other ways as well. And so we also look in some of our laws how marriage is respected and how it's so easy to get a divorce and how one spouse can file a divorce and force a spouse to go through that against their will in Texas within 60 days. And so you're seeing a lot of issues manifest themselves in America, whether it's poverty with children, whether it's education problems, because of the breakdown of the family. So continuing to define marriage as it should be, as between one man and one woman, continues to have tremendous significance. It has its place. And so I think that we see challenges that even in Texas, where a lot of people support that current law and our Constitution as it's defined, but we're seeing the definition of the marriage. We're even seeing how we define mother and father being challenged. And some people want to change that. They want children to have parent 1 and parent 2 on a birth certificate, and really try to remake everything that is what we know of the traditional marriage and family. So we've seen some of these issues come up in Texas and other parts of the country, and we're really at a very critical point. And this is not only a state or a national issue. We've seen this happen in Great Britain. They've recently legalized gay marriage, and just as soon as they legalized gay marriage, you now have a couple that wants to sue the Church of England to force them to perform a marriage against their religious rights in a church. And so we're going to see, but I circle back around to say there's a reason for this, and it's because marriage matters and it's tremendously important. That's why you see people who want to redefine it. They're fighting for so much legitimacy because they know that when it comes to our society, marriage is at the top.
Marriage is what makes a family. It makes or breaks a family. As you look at a mom and you look at a dad and you see the love for each other that comes from that in a normal, natural way, that is transmitted into the lives of children. what do you see, Jonathan, in families where that criteria is not met, that there is a place for the mother and a place for the father?
Well, I see that men and women continue to struggle to find a way to define it, define their roles as we see things changing in our own society. And we even see it in the Christian community. And we see people that are struggling to deal with, well, when the marriage or the family breaks down, how do you treat those people, and how do you deal with it going forward, and people wanting to be sensitive to that and so on. But the reality is, when you deal with policy, you look at what statistics tell us, and they consistently tell us that the best place for mom and dad and children to be is in a married household. And we deal with economics, you deal with psychological, we deal with the financial side, even the domestic violence issue. For women, the safest place to be is in a married household, and we know that that's best for children. And so, we're continuing to see that evidence there. It has not changed, but you see people wanting to retreat from that. But there are a lot of good information that is showing that sociologically and behaviorally and educationally, this makes sense. Additionally, economically, it costs the state of Texas alone $3 billion every year because of the breakdown of the family, whether that's unwed childbearing or divorce. So it has a dramatic financial impact. But I think that there's a way to be compassionate about this, but that doesn't mean that you're not honest. And we have to continue to educate people and not act as if these things aren't happening and they're not having a negative impact statistically. But I will say this, as you see marriages and families breaking down, it does make the marriage issue more vulnerable for people to say, you know what, then what matters, why does it matter how we define it then? If it's not as sacred as it used to be, then we want a piece of this pie as well. And the state of Texas is looking at this issue at the Texas Supreme Court as how we define it. We've seen the court cases and decisions from the national level. Right. And so we're just really beginning a very robust debate about the marriage issue.
Well, I know it's coming forth, and I am just so pleased that God's has you in that position of defending Texas values in regard to marriage and family. We've just gone through a very tumultuous 3 sessions of our legislature being in town. And one of the major issues, we've gone through education, we went through transportation, but one of the major issues that we've dealt with this year is in the area of life. Let's talk about how that was played out at the Capitol this year in regard to even the breakdown in being able to administer government from a positive point of view.
So you have those moments when you're involved in these issues, and Evelyn, you've been involved and been a leader in these issues and these values issues for so long, and so many of us, you want to serve, you want to be used, and it was so exciting, and I'll just speak for myself, I felt really honored and just so special to be a part of what happened here in the state of Texas recently.
I'm going to say amen. We're not church, but I'm going to say
and I think a lot of people felt that way. And one of the things I was even more excited about, though, was that so many other people from across Texas, from across the country, and probably from other parts of the world were able to come into Texas and be a part of the process. I'm here in the Austin area and at the Capitol very often and interacting with government, and so it definitely was special to me, but I was just excited that so many other people got to be a part of it, because you rarely get that opportunity. And in the work we do, that's so often what we hope for, is the average individual, if you will, that goes to work every day, that takes care of their family, but we know they're out there. We know they're with us. And that's what I was telling elected officials. So you had this pro-life issue, you had this issue to defend life, and really some basic protections for women, for the unborn child at a stage that we know is practically viable, could live outside of the womb at 5 months. Surely we can protect life at 5 months. And so, but you saw the other side react to such common sense measures with such vitriol, so negative. I mean, there were people chanting "Hail Satan" in the Capitol, while folks on our side were chanting "Amazing Grace" and were singing, gospel hymns and so on, and just being peaceful. So you saw this clash. But a lot of times people will try to say, well, their numbers were just as equal to yours. This was one time where I think you saw a better representation of what we know exists in Texas. We know, by and large, the majority of people throughout the state of Texas support the issue of life. That's why they vote people into office that continue to support these measures. But so many of them were able to come down to the Capitol or be in the Austin area where it was all happening. And it was a moment where they could say, and we could be so pure about saying, your voice will be heard like never before on these days if you're here with us. And they showed up. And it was...
They showed up.
They did. They did. And it was glorious. It allowed so many women and men to share their story, their personal story on how this issue is. And I think that's something that people need to be reminded of from time to time, and often, is that public policy has an impact on people's personal lives. There's no doubt about it. And people will often model their lives by what the law says is okay. So without question, the fact that the law will now say that the state can say there should not be an abortion, or we have a right to protect that child at 5 months.
Yes.
Lives will be saved. That law will be followed, and you will have young men and women that will make a decision to not abort their child simply because the law doesn't allow them to. And they will later feel good about that. But I think there were so many people that got to really be a part of the process and possibly have some healing on this issue.
Oh, I know there was, Jonathan. We did, I don't know, probably Laurie could tell us 30 or 40 hours of live broadcasting down here. And just hearing the stories and talking to them. And even talking to those that opposed all of the bill, the 4 parts of it. And asking them, why are you here? And there were people that had no idea. Well, it's because so-and-so called me and said I need to get down here. Some of the activities that went on were so disgusting, but it was a wake-up call for Texas.
Yes, and Texas answered the bell. I've talked to a lot of elected officials that they're going to do the right thing, without a doubt, but they felt so much more emboldened. They actually felt a lot more confident and at peace about doing the right thing, because there were so many people here in person supporting them. And I think people sometimes forget that they are human as well. They're going to stand for what they believe in, but when they have their people around them, it makes a tremendous difference. And there were so many great speeches from the House and Senate floor. Mm-hmm. But I often testify at these type of events, but there were so many people that this may have been the only time they had their voice heard. Absolutely. And I was so glad that so many people were able to be a part of that process and to speak out and to have their voice heard. And so I am hoping that other states will follow what Texas has done, and possibly other countries will look at this issue and see how such a common sense step these are to protect the health of women, to also value and protect the unborn child, and for people to have seen when it all mattered, Texas was very clear about where we stood majority on this.
And cooperative.
Yes.
We came together.
We did, and you brought that up. The other side got to a point where they knew the votes weren't on the side. The only way that they could win the argument or win the day was to obstruct.
Yes.
And to really degrade our process and attack it. And that process protects both sides, or however you view it. And the integrity of that process in our Texas Capitol was so important for it to be redeemed. It was redeemed.
And it was validated.
It was
validated. It's like that stamp. This is a paid bill. It's paid for. Well, Jonathan, there's just so many questions I'd like to ask you about that, but we're in another battle right now in regard to religious liberty. I think you know that since George W. Bush was in his first term in the White House, I was named as America's honorary prayer coordinator for the National Day of Prayer. And I have served with National Day of Prayer for 37 years in the Austin area. A number of years ago, probably 10 years ago, we got sued twice in San Antonio for having a public event on the steps of the City Hall. And for a year, it just consumed my life trying to do the things that were right and get the right kind of help to work through that process. It seems like that dragon died, but it has been raised to new life. Let's talk a little bit about religious freedom and what's going on in Texas in that regard today.
This is an issue that I have worked on professionally and personally at times, and is so dear to my heart. It is probably the area where Texas Values, the organization that I had, spends the most time in different ways, is speaking out and standing up for the issue of religious liberty. And you brought up a point about how you fought this battle and there was a dragon slayed, but then it comes up again. That is an aspect of many of the issues we work on, and I try to let people know we need to settle in and come to terms with that there is really no ending point for some of our issues that, okay, this has been successful, now let's move on to this other thing, because the way that our opposition is, they just come back the next day and try to find another way. And so, but I think we can be encouraged by that because we know what we're doing is right. So there have been some very important battles fought on the issue of religious liberty. We have a statutory protection called the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act. There are many people, including myself, who believe that we need specific protection in our state constitution that brings Texas up to date on what the courts have said is the strongest religious liberty protection we can have. We don't have that in our constitution. And what you're seeing happen in Texas, with the home of the Alamo and so many, so much religious heritage, you see this happening in San Antonio. I mean, the city has so much religious history. It's named after a saint. You see this happen in League City. So let me start with League City, what we see happening. And this is something that's happened in Hays County and other parts of the state, and there's a solution to it. But you have local governments that will start their meetings with a prayer.
Right.
And this is something that's happened since our first Congress. There are a long list of government having their meetings started with a reverence or a reference to God. They do it at the Texas Capitol. But you have groups who I feel their goal is to wear people down, like you talked about.
Yes.
Being involved in litigation, even if you know or you have a strong belief that you're going to be successful at the end of the day, going through the court process costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. These groups know that, and so one of the groups in League City, Freedom from Religion Foundation, they even sued Governor Perry to keep him from praying at a prayer event a couple years ago. They were unsuccessful, and we believe they'll be unsuccessful in League City. But we have fought this battle of starting a meeting with a prayer or some type of invocation so many times in the state of Texas. It keeps popping up in different places. And so, but here's part of their thinking, from what we can tell, is these local elected officials may not always be quite as aware of the law or who to reach out to. And that's not their fault. I mean, that's not particularly their specialty. But groups like Liberty Institute and my group, Texas Values, have worked on this issue, and we provide those services and resources for free and can come to aid in these situations. So League City, I know we have been in communication with them, and so I know that there's help there. And so, but that issue hasn't been decided yet. But oftentimes, and I will tell you, the way to solve this problem is for elected officials to say, we will not be pushed around. We will not be misled about what the law is. What we're doing is constitutional. And so when that happens, the government stands up and says, no, that we're going to allow this. And oftentimes that means the local citizens can speak from the mic and start the meeting with a prayer. That way their private rights are not infringed upon. When people stand firm in the state of Texas and other places on religious liberty, we usually win and we're successful. And so we're hoping more people do that. In San Antonio, you've got a little bit of a different issue.
This is a big one.
It is a big one because it touches on these other issues. It touches on life. It touches on marriage,
yes,
family values, and so on. We're seeing these, and they're calling them non-discrimination policies. But you have discrimination protections in place to prevent that from happening, but it's on things that the courts have already acknowledged that you shouldn't be discriminating, and it deals with historical discrimination issues such as race, such as religion, sex, and gender. But what you have is a small group of people that want to apply special protection for people who define their sexual orientation as homosexual, as asexual, could be pansexual. There are a whole lot of different categories that are popping up, or based on how they identify themselves as a gender. And it's called gender identity. And it essentially means people that cross-dress, that switch genders, that one day they feel one way, the next day they feel the next. And so it is not an objective standard that the law can really apply as to what it really means when you talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. And we don't even know that there's anything that's going on to the level that says that you need these protections in place. But the bigger part of it is by a government saying, and what has happened in San Antonio is they have said that if you want to be involved in city government and be appointed to certain offices, or if you want to be involved in city contracts, you cannot ever, prior to the ordinance being in place, have said anything by word or deed that could be shown as demonstrating a bias. Not even, so-called discrimination, but if you said something that someone says, well, that's a bias against homosexuality, I don't see how that's any different than just saying someone doesn't agree with the homosexual lifestyle. They take a different view. It's an attack on free speech. It's an attack on religious freedom. It's an attack on the values that most Texans hold dear. And it essentially boils down to saying people of faith should not be able to be involved in city government or being city contracts. And it rises to the level of saying that there's a religious test in San Antonio, and if you don't pass that test, then you can't be involved in the city government. That's something that our Constitution has never stood for, and I feel confident that if this ordinance goes through, that it will be struck down in court.
Yeah. You'll have to, as an attorney, you'll get to play house with them.
Well, and we've done some of that. There was a hearing last night in San Antonio. Every Wednesday they allow citizens to be heard. So we presented testimony, and the overwhelming support or the voices there were in opposition to this. So I don't even know that the public of San Antonio is with them on this issue. And so not only do they have legal problems, they've got problems in their community. There's division on whether or not the support is there. And I think if they go forward, they're going to find themselves standing alone on an island and having people in the church community, in the cultural community, and people in all different aspects, people just that feel like it's a liberty violation, are going to have concern. And a lot of people feel like it's a tremendous overreach of the government to step in and basically take sides on controversial issues.
How is it that a government could get to the position that they could say, if you are a white man, you cannot do this? Or